I'm making, I don't know whether Sean was beaming there or not, but the point I'm making is exactly the point I made at the beginning, which was racism of the gaps. In a lot of these cases, there are 1,000 other potential explanations that could go in that space. We still need to have that discussion. I could be completely wrong. Like, I'll throw that out there. It could totally be the case that these officers are literally just like, black person, I'm pulling him over, don't like him. And, you know, less likely.
Wait, I gotta stop. Hold on. I gotta stop. Wait a minute. I gotta stop you right now. Okay, because you characterize this so juvenilely every single time. You keep saying like, all these cops are racist. They just want to pull black people. That's not what it means to be racist. This is like a child's understanding of what it means to be racist. It might be the case that like you see a black person, you're like, I don't know about him. And you see a white person, like, oh, he's probably up to like doing good things. He's probably chill. You could literally have like some implicit bias that works on that level. It doesn't mean, okay, but every time you characterize it, you're like, oh, those evil racist cops. Nobody in here, well, I don't know if Fanatic believes this. I don't believe that there are like all these horrible racist cops that are like driving over to pull over black people. It might just be the case you see somebody like, black person, expensive car. I don't know, man.
So Destiny, I'm willing to accept you believe that, but do you really think
why does he put that on me?
So I'm willing to accept absolutely that you believe that. But like when I see people talk about this issue, it is in a public sense.
See, this is that thing she's going to do again when she's going to start talking about, like, everyone else, man. Everyone else. But please don't accuse me of that. Like, don't accuse us of that.
No. I don't care about what you've seen, like, the craziest person on Twitter. I'm not here to stand for those people, okay? I fight against those people. So if you want to, like, you can do a whole video on all the crazy shit that people say on Twitter. That's not going to make anything you're saying less ridiculous.
Destiny, I wasn't pretending to be you when I said that. I was saying I could definitely fill that gap if I wanted to with cops are just racist. I was saying that. I wasn't saying that's you saying that. Okay, I was using that as an example. But what you're doing, and responding with such defensiveness, like, I don't get that. I wasn't asserting that you're saying that. I can explain
why. The problem is because every time you consistently do this, again, I haven't said anything, every time these arguments, you present the other side, it's like, well, it could be this multifaceted problem where people are driving their taillights out. Maybe there's a difference in behavior. Or I could believe your side, that every cop is a racist fucking dipshit, huh? Like, yeah, if you make our side sound that way, of course it sounds, like, ridiculous, right?
Okay,
I could do the exact same for you. And I could say, like, you know, it might be that cops have, like, an implicit bias when they pull over people. Or maybe every black person just knocks their taillight out and drives around with no fucking brake lights in the night, right? Like, I can make your side sound just ridiculous. I'm just saying that when you talk about my side, stop characterizing it as the insane lefty Twitter sphere that I know that we both deal with, because I'm definitely familiar with this one. Don't characterize it that way. I'm not saying that all cops are driving as evil racist monsters. I'm just saying that, like, when cops drive around, like, sometimes you might be making these implicit bias decisions, which is why when it's a little darker outside, you can't tell the difference between the race of the person in the car, as this study definitely suggests, with over 95 million traffic stops while controlling for time of day because of the veil of darkness test. Maybe it is the case that they make these implicitly different decisions. I'm not saying they're all fucking racist, horrible people. That's it.
Okay, fair. You know what? Actually, I'll take that as fair enough. Like, if your position is that it's not intentional racism and it's potentially just subconscious, they're pulling them over because perhaps as a police officer, they approached situations more where when they pulled people over, they found more drugs or they found more criminality in some cases when they pulled over black people. So they made the assumption this person is more likely to be committing a crime than a white person. Perhaps that is at play. I'm willing to concede that.
Okay, that's a great concede. But can we
real quick? What the second part of the study, which we're not going to get to, but it's interesting you bring that up because the second part of the study has to do with hit rates when it comes to pulling people over. And guess what? The hit rates on black and Hispanic people are always, like, way fucking lower than white people, which is the contraindication of what you just said. Maybe they pull over black people more often because they're more likely to get drugs. That's not the case. It's actually more likely the case when they pull over black or Hispanic people, they're less likely to get drugs, but they still pull them over. But that's a whole second part of the study that I don't think we're going to have time to get to today.
We don't have to get to it today because I actually mentioned that to her the last time in our conversation, and I specifically mentioned the hit rate, which you asked me for, and then I told you specifically that African Americans were less likely to be found with contraband, yet they still constituted so many more of these search.
I was more so implying criminality in general. As we do know, African Americans tend to commit more crime than their population size.
Wait, so now you're justifying that bias. So now you're using the idea that just because there's like a higher rate of criminality amongst African Americans that we should just be able to pull them over as a whole without any evidence to support that?
I was actually sitting here and trying to generously characterize your side. I was sitting here and trying to say, okay, perhaps this, because Destiny called me out and said, listen, that's not our position. We're not saying cops are just being racist. We're saying that there could be an implicit bias. So I've been sitting here trying to justify perhaps what that implicit bias in cops' minds could be to try to explain the argument that you're making. and understand it. So I'm actually trying to be generous to you here and say, okay, perhaps this is the thought process that cops are going through. Because if cops are going through that thought process of, well, maybe it's just because blacks commit more crime, so I'm going, then what is the implication? It's the original thing I was saying, which is they're just racist and they hate black people and they're pulling them over, right?
No,
so
that's
like
not the other.
if there aren't, so otherwise, what are the reasons cops are thinking this? Are we saying there's an implicit bias because they arrest more people in general, or just an implicit bias because they just don't like black people?
Well, no, it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be about them not liking black people. There's just been so many different things that shown like why there's implicit bias, and I can totally understand. Just me being generous myself, I'm going to do your type of generosity. I could totally understand if I was a cop and I was constantly assigned to work dealing with really bad actors in specifically black neighborhoods, that it would eventually start skewing my point of view specifically about those people, such that I would start developing maybe some sort of unconscious bias, where it's not like I think all of these people are evil or whatever, because I probably dealt with some good people, but I just already have, because whenever I'm looking for crime, I'm happening to do it in these neighborhoods, then it would cause me to probably start feeling a little bit more biased against these people, and then that might result in things that, especially when you start talking about discretionary things like traffic stops, you'll find those results, and then it's exacerbated by the idea. But I got you, and I'm good. Then we agree, and it's exacerbated by the fact when you find out in places like Florida that multiple different precincts were literally using black mugshots as their target practice in their shooting ranges and things like that, where it would probably impact your implicit biases. So then that way, yeah, you're going to get these differences in outcomes. But guess what? If it's just something as loose and as soft as implicit bias, then that means that it would still be disproportionately, systemically disadvantageous to black people, right?
Okay, so I really want to clarify this. Sorry, because Destiny was offended by me characterizing your side of the argument as cops just being racist. And I'll accept that if that's true, that you guys don't believe that. That's fine. But I just want to clarify. So that's not what you guys think. You don't think cops are just being racist.
I can't speak for Fnatic, okay? I will say on my end, and I believe what most reasonable people say, and I hope Fnatic will agree with me, I do not believe the vast majority of cops in the United States are fucking card-carrying neo-Nazi or KKK members, okay? That being said, when you are a police officer, we might have said this before, and I'm going to say this again, and this is just fucking talk to cops or whatever. A lot of what goes into policing has to do with making judgment calls on the fly. It is a very, like, you do it when you're working, when you're doing like a beat, when you're doing patrol, like a lot of what you do is like a totally feelings-based thing. You're not walking around with a fucking clipboard and a scientist in your backseat and a sociologist to make sure that you're being fair. A lot of it is you just kind of do what you feel. And it is totally possible that while you deal with people, you do develop these sorts of biases. And I don't necessarily fault cops for it. Like, you're a horrible fucking person because when you see a black person in a hoodie, you assume they're more likely to have a gun than when you see like a white pimply kid with fucking glasses on, even if it might be like a little bit of a bias thing. I don't necessarily fault cops for it. It's just something like, if it happens, it's good to be aware of it. And if it's happening in bad ways, like for instance, if you're an innocent black dude, you're driving a nice car and you tend to get pulled over more than you otherwise should, then it's something we should look at and something we should maybe change. That's all I'm saying. Not that cops are racist, horrible monsters. Yeah.
They're
asserting that the bias happened. They're asserting that the bias is represented when the cop pulls somebody over and they ask them to search the vehicle, because most of these searches are consent searches. So like they would ask for based on a lower standard of suspicion for a white person. Like hence there's more searches.
There's a lower threshold,
hence those searches yield less results. Right. And anytime you search any group like in higher numbers, like you're going to get lower yield results. Like that does happen.
Wait, because, proportionally? Proportionally?
Like, if it's proportional, it should be like the case that like if every like 1 out of 10 people that you like pull over, if you do that roughly, and even if there's different percentages in that group, unless there's some statistical like artifact that I'm missing, it should still roughly be the same hit rates, unless you're applying a different threshold to different groups of people.
Well, there's other things that I've talked about that go into it, but like I don't want to argue about traffic studies for the rest of the day. Like I would be interested in who's consenting to the searches, because a lot of people are like, I don't have anything, like search my vehicle, like kind of thing, and they get searched and all that because they don't want to go through the hassle. And that could be due to the fact that they have like a negative view of the police and that they don't want to seem more guilty and they think that will get them in more trouble. So there actually could be reasons for even that, but like. Yeah, like if anytime you're searching a group disproportionately more, you're going to get a lower hit rate, and like but that's really annoying. I've talked about it specifically.
Hold on, wait. To be clear, that's not true at all. If you have a group where there's 90% of one people.
I'm sorry, raw numbers and more. The more searches you're
but
conducting.
no one would ever talk about raw numbers. We would always talk about proportions. Always. No one's ever going to be talking about raw numbers here. When we talk about hit rate, rate is a word like based on ratio. It's going to be based on proportions. No one's talking about raw numbers.
You misunderstand. All right, I'll give you an example. In stop and frisk, when there was like 90,000 stops under like the last year of Giuliani, the hit rate for contraband was higher, right? The proportions were all the same. Under Bloomberg, when there was 800 or 640,000 stops, right? The hit rates were lower, even though the proportions were all the same. So I'm like, anytime you increase the raw numbers, typically that's due to a lowering of the standards. You're going to get a lower hit rate.
It depends on how you're defining hit rate here.
But the problem is that if you're getting a different hit rate for different subgroups, then unless you have another explanation, it seems as though a different threshold is being provided for doing a search. That's the problem.
Yeah, I understand that. I'm literally stating like what you guys are saying because it wasn't
I know,
clear.
But the way that we feel that is the argument is that like it seems like there's like the threshold is being lowered due to race is what the argument would be from somebody like.
Sorry, keep going.
Yeah, go.
There actually sounds like there's a lot of agreeing going on here that's being made to sound like disagreeing. Like I don't disagree with the fact that there may be factors possibly that cause cops to pull over Black people or Hispanic people more than white people, whether that be because of their on-the-ground policing in which they've had bad interactions or something. But the overall argument here was about systemic racism. And does a factor of I've had more interactions with one group negatively and therefore I'm going to pull over them, does that pass the threshold of racism? Like,
yeah, so going back, so this is why I hate this term, and this is why I don't like anybody using it. I think we should all just move past it. The correct definition of, I will fight to that on this. Who is it? Now it's Sean. Why? Why is your mic doing this?
I don't know.
Okay. Systemic racism is supposed to mean that there is a system that perpetuates racism that doesn't require any individual racist actors. That's supposed to be, that's the difference between, because if it wasn't that, then it would just be called racism. So the idea behind systemic racism might be that you have a whole system full of people, and they can be the most tree-hugging, left-leaning, loving, non-race people in the world, but somehow, because of how that system was implemented at some point in time, because of the outcomes that it's creating, and then it's perpetuating, and then it's exacerbating, the system itself can be systemically racist without requiring individual actors to be racist. When I attack like the criminal justice system or the police departments, it's usually from that angle of systemic racism. It's not, I don't think that there are that many cops in this country, or there by raw number there might be, but as a percentage, I don't think most cops in this country are horrible fucking racist people. I don't believe that. But there still might be a lot that participate in systems that can kind of exacerbate racial outcomes, like unwittingly or unknowingly or unconsciously. Like they don't want to be doing it. It's just kind of like what happened, especially knowing where you're at.
Yeah. What I would define, I was going to say, what I would define as a problem, to make a distinction, is a unearned racially disparate outcome. Like, so something that is not the result of behavior. Like that's what would be a problem for me. Like the non-problems are the things that are the consequences of the actions people take. Also in that are the disadvantages of a cosmic injustice. Like, yeah, we all don't get to choose like how we start out, but the idea that we would harm people in the present to make up for sins in the past doesn't make any sense. So again,
but no one's advocating for that though. The idea whenever we're talking about systemic racism and first off, yeah, most of the time, even when you want to get into conversations like reparations, which we're not going to have right now, but even in those cases, it's not necessarily about like just because of things in the past. It would be because of present harms that are related to the things in the past that we would be trying to address there. And then furthermore, whenever we're talking about systemic racism, yes, it doesn't necessarily need racist actors in order to perpetuate itself, but that lack of necessity does not imply that there are no racist actors also perpetuating the thing. But typically, go ahead.
I'm gonna lose it. Sorry, I'm gonna lose it because this is what I keep hearing from you guys. We're talking about racism, like the word racism, and you keep going around and being like, yeah, systemic racism apparently isn't actually racism. And I agree with Destiny where he's like, I don't like this word. I'm starting to not like it either, because when I sit here and I've been like, we're talking about systems which involve racism. Racism is an extremely loaded word. Like racism.
You're quoting me earlier. I said literally all of this. I literally said this.
Serious degree of malice. Can I finish? So when I characterize the argument of we are supporting the idea that systemic racism exists in policing and institutions, and I frame that in a way of police officers are being racist, and then you guys say, stop straw manning me. Well, maybe the problem is that the left need to stop using the word racism, and you guys should have said at the beginning.
Well, this is why I made this statement. Hold on, let me do justice really quickly.
That there's maybe systemic bias that, or like, you know, the word racism is like so loaded.
But that's why I end up changing the phrase earlier, where I said specifically it shouldn't be about systemic racism. That's why if we would rather, I think it'd probably be more helpful if we were to say something like it was systemically disadvantageous, right? Like we can say something like that.
But nobody.
So do you guys?
I know that no one uses the term, but I know that no one uses that term, but that's why I said it would be helpful, because specifically, obviously, you get the she literally used my exact phrasing. Specifically, the phrase racism is loaded. So then when we say systemically racist, then it automatically brings up all sorts of imagery and a different mentality for individuals when we're just trying to talk about systems that are literally designed, or intentionally or unintentionally, to covertly or overtly like disproportionately disadvantage African Americans. So, or not just African Americans, it could be against all these people. But so yes, the presence of bad actors, individual actors, is not necessary for a system that is disadvantageous. And that's what I appealed to earlier in the conversation. Specifically, think they're systemically disadvantageous, not racist.
Okay.